Hey everyone, on this week's Traded Black podcast, we look at the cannabis industry in the state of California and how it's always been viewed as potentially being the biggest cannabis market in the world, but the black market has always dominated. However, there are radical changes on the horizon, which means California could indeed become the biggest cannabis legal market in the world. What are they? We break it all down. Plus, what are key questions that you need to ask when investing into this industry? All this and more on our latest Traded Black podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Traded Black podcast. And as usual, we're talking cannabis. We want to get your feedback, so feel free to leave a comment below. We want to know, where is this industry going in the next 3 to 6 months? It moves on regulatory framework right now, and right now it seems to be at a standstill. But what are key questions that you think need to be asked pertaining to this industry when it comes to investments? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on that bell for all notifications. We got a big guest here today. And before we get into it, as usual, I'm the host, Shadd Dales, and all views on this podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. And let's welcome in our guest of the week in this week's Traded Black podcast, Aaron Edelheit. He's the CEO of Mindset Capital, which is based out of Santa Barbara, California. Good day, sir. How are things?
Things are well. How are you?
I'm good. You staying cool in Santa Barbara? Great spot to be, I would think, no?
I am. Yes, it is nice and cool. I feel very, very lucky to live here. And thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I think a lot of people have followed, obviously, your newsletter, and you have a big voice, obviously, in the cannabis industry. But for those that don't know you, as mentioned, you have an equity firm based in California, big voice in cannabis for some of the biggest MSOs in the country who follow you on Twitter. Your handle is @AaronValue. That's AARON Value. And you can subscribe to your Substack newsletter by logging on at value.substack.com. I want to begin with
mindsetvalue.substack.
Sorry, Mindset Value.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah, no worries.
Got to have people going in the right direction, right, Aaron?
Yeah, that's right.
Anyways, I want to begin with revenue in the industry. We always hear about revenue. The bottom line in EBITDA for any business, obviously, is the most important bottom line. But do you think there's a lot of investors right now who are getting inundated by this continuous narrative from many companies knowing their margins are compressed? So are we getting this wrong when it comes to capital and size? And if so, do you care to elaborate further on that?
So what you ask is a very complicated question. And
Yeah.
It's very complicated because when you look at the cannabis market, every state is like its own country. And
100%.
so there are markets that are limited license, and then there are markets that are not limited license, and then there are markets that are forced vertical integration. There are markets where there's wholesale, where there's not, and where there's caps on growing. And so what you're seeing in markets that aren't limited in nature, have restrictions, is prices over time come down fairly fast. And that the wholesale business of growing and selling to people, you are either, if you think about it, you're either the low-cost operator or you're producing a high enough quality that people are happy to pay for that kind of premium, excellent cannabis. Mm-hmm. Everything else in between is just getting squeezed. And all that excess margin over time, if you just think about it, should go away. And that you should have, over time, companies that have an advantage on producing cannabis on a cost structure should do fine, and that companies that produce a premium kind of great cannabis should do better. And so what's interesting is, one company that's interesting to follow in this regard is one state that's been seeing cannabis prices come down is Massachusetts.
Right.
It is a limited license market. You're only allowed, every company, you're only allowed to own like 3 dispensaries. you're capped out at a certain level. There's been capital that's come into the state, and so you have a lot of production coming online. And used to sell for, it's $3,000-$4,000 a pound. Now it's 2,000, may come down to 1,500 a pound. But there's one company, at least in the first quarter, that's Maramed, that you may have heard of, and they have. Yeah, so what's fascinating is everyone in Q1 was complaining margins are coming down or getting compressed in Massachusetts. And then you had Maramed, who has their flower, Nature's Heritage. And they were saying, hey, we're selling out at 3,800. So I think what you're going to see is...
That's a telling tale as to where we're at in this
and
industry
their margins went up.
Yeah.
And so you're going to start to distinguish between who's making, what kind of cannabis are companies making, and where is it selling, and where do you sit on the kind of the value chain, and how much of your revenue is devoted to wholesale selling to other people. Now, in a state like Florida, there is no wholesale market. You're forced to be vertically integrated, which means if you want to sell cannabis, not only do you need to open the dispensary, but you need to build out the farm and then build out the manufacturing facility to make edibles. And you can't buy from anyone else, nor can you sell to anyone else. You can only sell through your own dispensaries. And so there's all these weird things in cannabis. And so it's important. So like Michigan is seeing a big plunge because there's been a bunch of cultivation come online. And of course, California is kind of the best example of this, is that you've had kind of an oversupply in California. It's being worked through right now, and we can go into California, but you need to look on it on a state-by-state basis, see what production, what limits are in there that may allow kind of an outsized wholesale profit. But if you just think about, if I'm growing cannabis,
Right.
and I can control that and then sell it through my own dispensaries, there should be, if you're doing it right, there should be healthy margins in there. Are they as high as the 40 and 50% that the industry used to report when there was little competition and they could sell wholesale? Probably not. Over time, that's going to come down, but the market will be much larger.
So let me ask you
this. You need
to
be careful on what you're investing in.
Right.
And how much are they selling into the wholesale, and how much are their margins kind of over-earning on that side of the market? That's the way how I'm thinking about it. So it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, you bring up a great example, like a company like Maramed, $3,800 a pound. What are most MSOs doing? Is it around 2,000?
So no. So in Massachusetts, it's around 2,000. So when they're saying, "Hey, we're selling out at 3,800,"
exactly,
that should be like a light bulb or a bell should go off to be like, "Hey, what are they doing different? Why are they selling at this level? Is it sustainable?" We're going to find out in Q2, right? We're going to see further information. So maybe they do see some price compression. The economy is weakening, it's slowing down, you might see some more, but how far above the market are they? And do consumers respond to that? And we know, like in every other consumable, that consumers like to, you have a consumer set that is a value set that is like, hey, I just want to get high. And you have other consumers that want like a much better experience and are connoisseurs. And I think you're going to, cannabis is going to be no different than any other market. And I think it's going to be important to watch which companies are good at what part of the value chain. Right now, cannabis companies have to do everything.
Yes. Yeah. So I've attended a couple of Twitter spaces recently, and the sentiment continues to be focus on tier one companies. Always that. Do you agree with that? Because what I'm hearing and seeing is that there's a lot of companies that are flying under the radar that have healthy margins in play. So do you think the idea of falling tier ones means how does this industry unfold? If you see lucrative companies with healthy margins and then you see the other companies that are cashed up, do we see a lot of mergers and acquisitions, which many people are predicting? How do you see it kind of unfolding?
Well, I think there's just a different strategy that people have. If you want to focus on the largest companies, that's definitely a strategy of way to invest in the sector.
Yeah.
I am both invested in tier ones and companies that are much smaller. Like
Yeah.
MariMed is not considered a tier one, but what is the definition of a tier one? Is it just size? Is it just market
Mm-hmm.
cap?
Mm-hmm.
Like a company like MariMed isn't considered a tier one, but they have over $100 million in revenue. Their
Right.
EBITDA and free cash flow positive, and they're selling their products. Their margins are expanding, and their products are selling at a premium. That tells you something. Like what's the value of the quality of what they're doing as opposed to the size? And they have no debt.
Right.
They've been in a net cash position. So, like, I'm happy to stray from what's considered the tier one if I find a company that's doing something very different and operating at a much higher level. And there's other companies. I want to make sure that when I'm looking at the cannabis industry, that I'm investing in cannabis, that I'm not just investing in the multi-state operator business.
Yeah.
So I am looking, at the ecosystem because I think we're in the beginning of, I don't think the game's actually begun. I
Yeah.
think if
You'd
this is
mentioned that.
baseball, this is like spring training. It's really messy, it's weird, and I don't even think that the game has started. I think the game actually starts when you get something like safe banking or these companies have access to the financial markets and you have institutions participating. And so I think that there's a lot of companies that are doing interesting things. And like, for example, and just to let everybody know, I've been wrong on this specific name that I'm going to mention, but like, I think what Glasshouse is doing is arguably one of the most interesting things in the entire industry. And they're not a
Why?
multi-state operator, and they're in
Why is that?
California.
Why is that?
Well, what they're trying to do is say, hey, can we produce in one location the
Mm-hmm.
best quality cannabis for the lowest possible price? And they are going and utilizing this incredible weather that's right outside me, where it's like sunny 320, 330 days of the year, and it never gets cold and it never really gets hot. And they are, utilizing a state-of-the-art greenhouse, 5.5 million square feet, to achieve a cost structure that really can't be beat, not only in California, but the rest of the country. And so the average MSO, it costs like $800 to $1,000 a pound to produce cannabis, and it's grown indoors. In glasshouse in their greenhouse, they're shooting right now. I think they're somewhere in the $170, $180 a pound. They're shooting for
Yeah.
$100 a pound.
Yeah.
Now,
Wow.
obviously, cannabis can't cross state lines. It may not for a very long time, but if you can achieve a size and scale, if you can be profitable at $300 to $500 cannabis pricing, well, then you don't have to worry about margin compression. And if you're trying to
So,
use the environment and you can use 95% less energy, you're going to have advantages.
so what about size and scale, low cost producer? We've heard that. We've been inundated for years about that, but the quality is terrible. There's been even some large operators from
Whose quality?
well, do I really want to like point out some of the names? But
Oh, yeah, if you're
there's
talking
been,
about Canada, they're terrible.
yeah, they're
They don't
horrible.
grow. Look. That's the thing is the Canadian producers have kind of poisoned the well for the idea that you can grow. Well, one, it should be acknowledged that when you look at cannabis,
Yeah,
the quickest way you know that someone hasn't either operated in the industry, hasn't talked to a lot of operators, is when they say cannabis can be grown anywhere, and
which is so
and
far from the
there's
truth.
and that it's really easy to grow. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually incredibly hard. Some people actually, really smart people, are like, it's really hard to grow high quality cannabis consistently at scale.
Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard, do you find?
The plant is very, very sensitive. So name another agricultural product that's primarily grown indoors. And why is that?
Right.
Why there is no other. And the reason is it's very sensitive, and to get to the same consistent flower over and over, you need to control everything. And you go into the best operators, and it's like you're going into a biotech research facility. You're wearing whole white, your shoes, you're stepping in antibiotics. They don't let you touch the flower. There is a level of control that's incredible.
There's a market in Canada that is like the greenhouse capital of Canada. And outside of cannabis, they actually produce like indoor facilities for produce that are like peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes. They look great. They look nice and shiny, but the overall quality of the product is like there's as much flavor in a tomato as there is in a glass of water, but it looks nice and shiny. So in a lot of cases with cannabis, it kind of backs up to like what you're saying. Like it's very difficult to obviously grow a good quality product unless you're in a controlled environment in an indoor facility, correct?
But to do it consistently over and over. So there's crazy stories from Canada where when they first started, some of the largest producers, they first started producing, they didn't know they needed like 100 people to harvest things in 90 days. Like Canopy Growth had a failed harvest at the end of last year.
I know.
It's like, if this was about capital and throwing capital in people, like they would be producing great quality. And even in some of the largest Canadian companies, they were complaining on their call. They're like, we just don't have enough high quality cannabis. High quality cannabis sells, right? Yeah. And so if you're talking about value, you're talking about like value, commoditized cannabis that's inconsistent in quality. Well, yeah, it's super easy. And it's super easy to grow in small batches, right? But to do it consistently at scale, like this is a crazy thing. There was just a video. If you are investing in the space or you think that cannabis cultivation is growing, I'd like you to tell me, do you know what a scout is and what a scout manager is in a cultivation?
What is that?
No, it's a person that's looking for like pests and mold. Yeah. And so the biggest facility, they have scouts, they have scout managers. And it's because the last thing you want is like a disease or a pest to get in. And then what kind of nutrient? You talk to the best cultivators, and they're almost like artisans. It's almost like an art. What kind of salt do they use? What kind of nutrients? What percentage? It's both art, science, engineering, and things can go terribly wrong very quickly. And so what a company like Glasshouse is trying to do is like, hey, in 5.5 million square feet in a state-of-the-art greenhouse and perfect environment, can you get as close as possible to an indoor facility? And therefore, because you're not using energy, because you're using Mother Nature, because there's no inflation from the sun, can you achieve a cost that for most people, they're going to be like, this is great. Like, why wouldn't I just buy this? So that's what they're doing is very hard, but if it works, and I believe, obviously I'm bullish and I own the stock. If it works, it's going to be very, very valuable.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Canada, yesterday's news. Learned a lot of lessons from there. Investors want to get re-engaged in this industry. I was actually, again, part of these Twitter spaces. I was still surprised to see there's a ton of people that are now entering the space in for the first time. It's a very polarizing industry. They want to see where this is going. So if there's 1 to 2 important questions, and I like to ask this a lot to a lot of people, what are questions that investors need to ask when entering into this space right now?
Oh, so the number one thing is actually a question that these investors need to ask themselves.
Okay.
Do I understand what it means to invest in these stocks?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is US The only thing I'm interested in, by the way, just to be very, very clear, are US cannabis companies.
Yep. Okay.
Canada by itself is smaller than California. And the
100%.
Canadian producers have I they have not only incinerated billions of dollars of capital, but they by listing on US exchanges, they have in a way almost misled people that somehow their plays on the US. They have no operations in the US.
They
They
have
have
turned so many investors
yeah,
away in this industry, of
yeah.
course.
So
Yep.
so this is only about the US. Cannabis is federally illegal in the US. Because of that, there are almost no institution, very few institutional investors, and these stocks cannot list on US exchanges. So you're trading either over the counter or you're not even trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange. You're trading on secondary and tertiary exchanges. So, like some companies trade on the Canadian NEO exchange, right? So, you need to understand what you're investing in. These
Mm-hmm.
are illiquid stocks,
Mm-hmm.
small and micro cap illiquid stocks. Some of them trade what is referred to as by appointment. Someone needs to sell a big block, they got to go find another buyer. And some of these stocks trade $500,000 a day, if they're lucky, $1 million or $2 million a day, and they can move up or down 10, 20% in a day based
Yep.
on just who's buying or who's selling. And in a month, they could go up or down 20 or 40%. That has nothing to do just with if someone needs to sell, is someone trying to buy, etc. So you need to understand, do I understand that I am investing in a very illiquid company and that can move and be very, very volatile? And am I comfortable with that? If you don't understand that and you aren't honest with yourself, you should not invest in this industry.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I see from a lot of retail investors is
By the way,
this.
this is not investment advice.
No. I'm just saying is that I see from retail like, oh, there must be some conspiracy or they're manipulating the markets, and I just say to myself, no, these are actually just very, very illiquid markets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these, I don't believe those investors fully appreciate both up and down what that can mean. That's both the opportunity and the risk. So you can have a
Yeah.
company go in 1 year, like Air Wellness, from 5 to 35, and guess what? It's back at 5.
That crazy.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes. And
What
so
an
until they're part of the financial system, then you'll have more liquidity. That's how you can have a Canadian company that, because it's federally legal in Canada, can trade in the US and trade 30 or 40 million shares. And a company like Air Wellness, which will wildly outperform on, cash flow and everything else, and valuation metrics, it might trade 150,000 shares today.
I know.
If we're lucky, maybe 200,000.
So this is a lot. It's a retail play right now. Institutions are not getting involved at this point. However, if and when, and this is where we've talked a lot about in the past, and a lot of people that watch us are very familiar with the Safe Banking Act. For those that don't, this basically is a bill that's going to allow, obviously, these companies to get proper financing through the financial system, perhaps have their 280E tax code. The average tax rate for a corporation in the U.S. is anywhere between 25 and 30%. If I'm correct at the top of my head, some of these MSOs are paying north of 55%. So let's fast forward. You talked about safe banking about 5-10 minutes ago. When that does pass, first off, do you believe it will pass? And two, what does the industry landscape look like on day one once it passes?
I want to qualify this in that I am not, as much as I believe I understand about financial markets, investing in small caps and micro caps that I've done for over 25 years. I don't really understand the political process. I have weakly held positions. I thought there was a really good chance SAFE was going to get into America Competes. I was wrong. Not that I changed anything in my investment style. I believe it's like 50% like a coin flip that it's going to get in by the end of the year. I know people that feel very strongly that it's going to get in. I know people who think it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I have come to believe that I don't know that when I launched my dedicated cannabis fund at the end of last year that I realized just how important SAFE was. And I would say I literally just changed the name of my fund because I had so many problems and I naively made the mistake of putting the word cannabis in the name of my fund. I can't tell you the problems that happened, from banks not sending wires, investors not able to get through compliance. The other big thing that I would say is the barriers to investment have only grown in the last 6 months. So people wondering, like, why are cannabis stocks doing so badly, so poorly? It's
So the
because the
barriers
barriers.
increased.
Yeah,
Have they? Wow.
Vanguard cut off in April. I have friends and colleagues that have
Why do you think
IRAs or
it's
brokerage accounts. You have Shopify just turned off. I had an investor.
why is that though? Why? Why?
So
Like there's so
well, I think that the banks and the brokerages are trying to cut off anything even remotely risky. I think it started, looking back, I think it started with that Arca Geos hedge fund that kind of blew up in early 2021.
yeah.
I think the war in Ukraine has only
Yeah.
further intensified anything that's viewed money laundering. And so what you need to understand from like a bank's perspective or investment bank perspective, like if it's federally illegal and you're changing money, well, then that's money laundering, right? And
Yeah.
so I don't want to be
Yeah.
involved in that. And so I think the barriers have only increased, which has made safe banking even more important to the industry. And I think people have realized that, especially with the capital kind of getting sucked out of the industry. And so it is my belief. I think it's a coin flip. I hope it happens, but that is way beyond my
Yeah.
pay grade.
Yeah.
And so who knows what's going to happen in politics? I will tell you that I believe that the day safe banking passes, it is like a light switch will go off. And this is based on my own research. I believe that it will allow the largest investors to invest regardless of uplisting. And I believe that it will allow corporate America to invest as well. And
Which would
so
be
it would be a free
what a
for
day.
all. And
What a day that would be.
I would tell you is that's why I say that's when the game starts.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the whole
And then
hand
it'll be a
trading
game
thing.
of what happens to stocks that trade 150,000 shares a day
To like
when
30 or 33, 500 million, right?
I don't know what will happen, to be honest. And then what happens when corporate America wants to get involved?
Yeah.
Whether you're a tobacco company, alcohol company, a beverage company, a CPG, any of the Canadian LPs that have been pretending they're in the US will, I believe, they will all start to enter upon SAFE.
Yeah. You, as I said before, live in California. You've touched on Glasshouse Brands. This has been speculated could be, the biggest cannabis market in the world, but this is still led pretty much perception-wise by the black market. Yet you think the state is pretty much bottoming out right now, and we're going to see radical changes from a legislation standpoint over the next 12 months. Do you care to elaborate on that and bring people up to speed as to where the state currently is right now in the landscape of cannabis, and then most importantly, what changes that you think will radically change in the near future?
Yeah. So one, if I just zoom out, California
Yep.
right now, even with all of its problems, is the largest cannabis market in the world.
Okay.
I think it does no good to the industry and is really bad for the largest market to be suffering. So if I'm correct, and California is going to be much healthier and improved next year, as part of this process that it's undergoing, it is a positive for the entire industry, I believe.
So
And
what
so
is
if
that
I
process then?
so
What's
so
that
what's
process?
happening is that California kind of saw was going through a boom. A lot of the stimulus checks, a lot of the um, uh, uh, you have a market that is dominated by small farmers. 80% of the cultivation in California is by small farmers.
Okay.
And then what California's had a problem with is the taxes are really high,
Mm-hmm.
regulation is really high,
Mm-hmm.
and there weren't enough dispensaries. So California kind of pushed down local control, uh, and 60% of California, it was legal to consume it, but there was no legal way to buy it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened is when the stimulus checks kind of ran out and then the prices are really high, that the they were pumping out like the stimulus checks would continue. There was a big oversupply, and last summer the bottom fell out in
Mm-hmm.
California cannabis. Prices fell over 50%, like within a couple weeks. And it has caused a chain reaction, that basically the other thing is California is not a limited license market.
Right.
So what's happened is it's also a very discerning market because you have a long history of cannabis consumption. Consumers are very sophisticated. The level of product innovation is very, very high here. And so it's a very demanding customer and with a very strong illicit market. So if you're not
Right.
producing the best cannabis, like why would I pay that price? I'm just going to go over to,
You were saying to us
a
off
bunch of
camera,
choices.
Fresno, a market of 500,000 people, you could not buy legal cannabis anywhere in a market that size, correct?
That's correct. So that's the past, right? And so
Yeah.
what's happening is farms are going out of business left and right because they can't. The price of cannabis was going for $700 to $900 a pound, fell to as low as 200 last year. Okay,
Wow.
now it's like
Wow.
$400 to $500, and so you're having farms go out of business. There's also thousands of brands, way too many brands competing for shelf space of only at the
Tons.
time only 900 dispensaries.
And there was over
California,
1,000 brands, was there not?
yeah. So what California has realized, like, oh my God, we can't let the legal industry collapse. So what they
Mm-hmm.
just did, and this is remarkable for the state of California, they just eliminated their cultivation tax. They were one of the only states that had a flat cultivation tax. They eliminated that.
So
They
what does that then
then
mean now? What it
So
translate that
what it used to be is I'm a cultivator. Let's say I'm selling at $700 or $800. I was paying $160 of that price was going to the government. And then there are other taxes built upon that. Sales
Mm-hmm.
tax, local sales tax, excise tax, etc. So it's like a compounding. They removed that. It's starting July 1st. It's gone. The other problem is there were only like 900 dispensaries at the end of last year. California has kind of reorganized how dispensaries get approved.
Okay.
And so in the month of June, this is an important statistic, so tell me if I need to clarify this. In the month of June, California approved 8% of all dispensary licenses that they've ever approved was approved in
Wow.
the month of June.
So what's
So
that translated to
what
number-wise?
that's translated, it's like they approved 90 dispensaries in the month of June. At the end of last year, they had like 900. Now, so what's happening is the number of dispensaries are starting to grow. And there's
Yeah.
cannabis deserts like Fresno that there's no legal dispensaries in
Right.
this quarter, in Q3, 4 dispensaries in a city of 500,000 people are going to open. The same is going to happen in Oxnard and Costa Mesa and many others. And so they're finally unclogging the regulatory backlog. The taxes have fallen. And then you're having this supply shakeout where if you can't, the price of cannabis is below the marginal cost of production and farms are going out of business. Innovative Properties, one of the big cannabis real estate firms that I think trades in the New York Stock Exchange, they're one of the third or fourth largest tenants, King's Garden, who is estimated to sell $300 million of cannabis next year, defaulted on their lease payments.
Wow.
And so you're having supply come out of the market, and what you're having finally, brands go out of business. You're having a rationalization of the market at the exact time taxes are coming down, at the exact time that more legal dispensaries are coming online, and the market is healing. It just doesn't look like it. And so it's my opinion that cannabis, like any other product, will have to sell above the marginal cost of production. It has to, right? Just by definition. Otherwise, no one will produce it legally. And then what will happen is you'll have a much healthier market, and it'll be good not only for California, but it'll be good for all of cannabis.
Yeah, 100%.
Because then no one will point to California and be like, that's the future of this state.
And that's where the MSOs enter in the space, because they got to have to get better with their product. Makes sense.
Yes.
One thing I want to bring up too.
Yeah, and that's why what's interesting about Glass House is they're suffering. Like we just talked about price compression in Massachusetts down to $2,000. Glass House is duking it out at $400 to $500.
Wow.
So what happens if they can get where they're profitable at that price?
Right.
Well, then the world is their oyster.
100%. One thing I want to bring up too, 25% of all produce in the U.S. comes out of the state of California. And when I look at this black market right now, and maybe like I can't help but feel like I'm not reading too much into this, but every time you turn on the news, it feels like there's some sort of natural disaster that's taking place in the state of California. Fires, droughts, stuff like that, bone dry areas of water. So does that come into a play where it becomes an environmental shift as well within 100%. The state?
I think
trying
this
to
is the
lock
other,
down.
Yes. I think that what you're starting to see is that California didn't want to, for whatever reason, didn't really want to enforce it. But now it becomes an issue. I can tell you, as beautiful as it is outside, as nice as the temperature is outside, it has not rained here since February.
Wow.
And it is about as bone dry as you can get. And guess what can use a lot of water? An illegal cultivation
That's my point, right?
in California. And not only that, you also increase the risk of fire. And so there is a growing sense that like, hey, this is beyond just enforcement of a legal market, but this is actually something deeply important where we have to protect the environment against not only fire, but conserving our water. We can't have people illegally using water and then not paying taxes. So I think that that you're going to see, and you're already seeing a sense of this, is more money for enforcement coming from the state and more enforcement because it has to happen because it's a danger to all of California, which will help, again, California. But the thing that I love about lower prices, we should all be kind of celebrating lower prices, by the way. The lower the prices that legal cannabis goes, the more it competes with the illicit market.
Yep.
And it's my firm belief that the illicit market will have a tough time in the long term competing with the legal market, because you can't compete with the size and scale of a corporation, the innovation, the product quality, the safety, the choice. And so long term, the illicit market is actually a big opportunity for the legal market. And so I'm not, one of the things that I struggle with, and I'm an investor in the big MSOs, is like, I'm not sure it helps longer term. I understand what the MSOs are doing. Like, hey, we're building brands, we're building footprints, dispensaries, distribution, understanding, customers, and we're earning this money that we can then reinvest and build these big platforms. But when you have like $4,000 a cannabis in New Jersey and restricted, distribution and cultivation, you're just encouraging illicit market.
When I look at, and I'm just actually reading online right now, Lake Mead I'm sure you've heard the story, obviously, in Nevada. It's hitting like historic lows. This lake, if the a reservoir dips below 890 feet, which is still possibly years away, but this level is almost half of what it was at one time. Lake Mead would reach dead pool, carrying enormous consequences for millions of people across Arizona, California, Nevada, and parts of New Mexico. So this is a high priority within that region. Knowing as to what you said, it hasn't rained since February. Wow. That's
and they're talking actually about a very rare third La Nina year, so for next year. So I don't know when it'll rain here again. It may not rain until December. I'm really worried. We're just starting fire season. There's been a couple of fires about Yosemite, but the fire season hasn't started yet.
Well, I remember 5 years ago, I was out in Big Sur and driving down the coastal highway, and it was crazy. Just the helicopters that were everywhere, picking up loads of water everywhere. But yeah, it was fires that went on, but you hear that every single year. But listen, this has been so informational. A lot of good questions to ask when you're entering the cannabis space. And just an idea as to what we can anticipate moving forward. But most importantly, too, key things to look for, obviously, not only in addition to MSOs and the tier ones, but other trends and other companies as well. And a real educational part on having an idea if this is an industry to begin with, if you can stomach it, and realizing the ups and downs that many investors, I think, that have followed this space for quite some time have been accustomed to knowing and learning. But for somebody new, it's like buckle up. You're ready to go on a ride, to say the least, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. I think we're going to get next month will be jam packed with information. We're going to get all the companies reporting earnings, and we're going to get a view into what is New Jersey meaning. The other real positive for the industry is the entire Northeast is basically turning on. It started really with New Jersey, but we're going to get Connecticut at the end of the year, hopefully New York next year. Maryland is voting in November. Who knows when they'll actually roll things out. And so you continue to have these markets kind of turn on, and it's going to be fascinating to see what the companies say, what do existing markets do. I think you're going to continue to see divergence from companies, and you're just going to get a lot of information. And then, of course, there's constant news flow on, the federal perspective. We're still also waiting to hear from the Department of Justice about a new memo that we've been promised within days. And then on a state-by-state basis, there's word of Pennsylvania. And then the big one, longer term, if you're very bullish on the industry, that you want to see progress on is Florida, which could be the mother lode and could displace California for how big and how important that market could be. And Texas. The other thing is, when you have a Republican,
Texas, yes, a little bit further, little bit further down the road. But when I look at Florida right now, not to mention there's 21 million people. This turns rec and how big it could be. But in addition to that, there are so many people moving to Texas and Florida. It is incredible how much.
No, but here's the thing: in Florida, you have 130 million tourists that visit a year. They cannot step foot in a medical cannabis store in Florida. You need to be a Florida resident with a medical cannabis card. And so and then because they forced vertical integration, there's only 4 or 5 companies that are competing for Florida. And so when you look at the local dispensaries, some of these towns will only allow a certain number of dispensaries. So one of the reasons you see a foot race between the companies is get out their footprint before it's locked down.
I know.
And then it's forced vertical integration. And so, it's very important to watch the state of Florida. But the other side is, when you have a Republican Texas ag commissioner writing an editorial saying, hey, we need to rethink cannabis and it should probably be legal and up to the states. And you have a Republican like Nancy Mace, who basically runs full front and center on cannabis legalization. and this is still gonna be a very fascinating industry to watch, because there's this idea that it's the Democrats have to do something and the Republicans are totally against it. I think that is changing, and we see evidence of that on a regular basis.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you agree with Aaron? If you feel free that he's, saying the right things, or if you disagree, feel free to leave your comments below. As usual, if you like what we produce, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click on that bell for all notifications. Aaron, this has been great. Great podcast. I can understand why you got a lot of followers on your Substack newsletter. Again, how do people find you?
mindsetvalue.substack.com, and then they can find me on Twitter at AaronValue.
Nice. Very informational, to say the least. This has been great. Listen, I appreciate the time. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, wait until you see what we have next. Some of the best thought leaders in the verticals that we cover, from cannabis and psychedelics to cryptos and NFTs and sports wagering. So if you want to learn more, make sure to click on that bell for all notifications, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.